A mountain range can rewrite the entire story of life on Earth. This is the power of the Great Divide, a force that did far more than shape the landscape. It actively sculpted the destiny of species and the fate of human civilizations. You will discover how a single wall of rock and ice became an engine for evolution, forcing life to adapt in isolation and creating entirely new forms on either side of the peaks. It channeled the flow of human migration, leading to the rise of vastly different cultures, technologies, and empires that developed for millennia without ever knowing the other existed. How did a single geological feature manage to split the world in two? What hidden clues do these separated worlds hold about our own past? By the end of this journey, you will see the map of our planet and the story of humanity in a completely new light. What does it mean for our future when the walls that divided us begin to fall? Deep beneath our feet, the true story of the Great Divide begins. It starts with a pressure so immense, so patient, that it can move continents. Think of the Earth not as a solid ball, but as a dynamic puzzle, its pieces constantly, slowly jostling for position. When two of these colossal continental plates collide, neither is willing to yield. The ground itself begins to fold, to buckle, to rupture. Over millions of years, this slow-motion crash pushes rock upward, layer upon layer, until a brand new mountain range scrapes the sky. This was not a quick explosion, but a relentless, creeping ascent that fundamentally reshaped the world. The newborn mountains became a massive wall in the atmosphere, a permanent obstacle for the winds and the rains. Moist air sweeping in from one side is forced to rise, cooling and dumping its life-giving water before it can cross the peaks. This creates a stark contrast, a world of two halves. On the windward side, you find lush, green landscapes and abundant rivers. On the leeward side, just beyond the towering crest, a rain shadow falls, creating arid plains and deserts. This single geological event did not just build a wall of rock. It engineered two completely different worlds, two separate stages upon which the drama of life would play out in isolation. And it is on these stages that our next act begins, as the first living things arrive to find their world had been permanently split in two. Trapped on opposite sides of this new stone barrier, life found itself at a crossroads with no way across. A single population of animals, once freely mingling, was now cleaved into two. One group was left in the damp, cool forests of the windward slopes, while the other was stranded in the sun-baked plains of the rain shadow. They were the same species, but their worlds were no longer the same, and in these different worlds, the relentless pressure of survival began to pull them apart. Over thousands of generations, the unique challenges of each environment rewarded different traits. On the dry, hot side, a fox with larger ears, better for dissipating heat and hearing prey scuttle under sparse brush, would thrive and leave more offspring. On the wet, cold side, a fox with a thicker, more insulating coat would have the advantage, surviving the harsh winters to pass on its genes. The mountain wall did not create these new traits, but it created the perfect conditions for them to emerge and become permanent. This is the profound process of allopatric speciation, where geographical separation leads to the birth of entirely new species. Think of it not as a sudden event, but as a slow, inexorable drifting apart. Two groups of the same animal, once neighbors, gradually become strangers, then rivals, and finally, distinct forms of life incapable of interbreeding. These mountain ranges became nature's grandest experiment, isolating life in twin laboratories and proving that the very ground beneath our feet is a master sculptor of biodiversity. But this great divide was not only shaping the animal kingdom. A new kind of traveler was about to arrive, one whose journey would be channeled and whose destiny would be split by the very same peaks. The Andes Mountains offer a living, breathing testament to this process of division and creation. This colossal spine of South America acts less like a simple wall and more like an evolutionary cradle, a factory for new forms of life. Within its maze of isolated valleys and towering peaks, we find one of nature's most dazzling success stories, the hummingbird. Across most of the world, you might find one or two species of these tiny, hovering birds. But in the Andes, isolation has worked its magic on an epic scale. A single ancestral hummingbird population, fragmented by the impassable terrain, was scattered into countless secluded worlds. In one high valley, a group of birds might have encountered a species of flower with a long, curved blossom. In this isolated pocket, the individuals with slightly longer, more curved beaks had a distinct advantage, able to reach the precious nectar that others could not. Over generations, this pressure sculpted a beak perfectly matched to that single flower. Just over a neighboring ridge, in a different valley with different blooms, another population of hummingbirds embarked on its own evolutionary journey, perhaps developing a shorter, sturdier beak to pry into tougher blossoms or catch small insects. The result of this grand, natural experiment is an explosion of breathtaking diversity. The Andes are home to over 140 distinct species of hummingbirds. Each one is a unique solution to the puzzle of survival, a masterpiece of adaptation forged in the isolation of the Great Divide. This spectacular variety shows us that a physical barrier does not just separate life, it actively encourages it to blossom into new and wondrous forms. And this same principle of separation was about to be applied on an even grander scale, not just to birds and foxes, but to our own human ancestors as they spread across the globe. This same process of division was waiting for humanity. Small bands of our earliest ancestors, perhaps just a few dozen strong, moved across the vast continents. They were following the migrating herds that provided their food, their entire world defined by the horizon they could see. One day, that horizon was abruptly replaced by an impossible wall of rock and ice, a barrier so immense it seemed to defy the very curve of the earth. These were not hills to be summited in an afternoon. These were the teeth of the world, jagged and endless. For these pioneers, the mountains presented a stark and simple choice, a decision that would echo for thousands of years. They could attempt a crossing, a gamble that meant navigating unknown, treacherous passes where a single storm or rockslide could mean the end of their entire group. Or they could turn, following the natural contour of the range, letting the land itself guide their path. This was the first great forking of the human road. One group, perhaps lured by the sight of green valleys on the other side, or driven by a relentless curiosity, chose the dangerous path over the peaks. The other, larger group likely chose the safer route, diverted for generations along the mountain's flank. In that single moment, a single population of humans was cleaved in two. Their journeys diverged, leading them into separate basins, onto different continents, into worlds that would remain completely unaware of each other's existence. The Great Divide had now captured humanity, setting the stage for a grand and separate experiment in culture, technology, and society. This stone barrier now became a wall between worlds of human creation. As the first nomadic hunters settled down and began to farm, the mountain range transformed from a simple obstacle into a permanent civilizational boundary. On one side, a society took root, domesticating local grasses into wheat and barley, herding goats and sheep. On the opposite side, separated by that unyielding wall of rock, another society was doing the very same thing, but with a completely different set of raw materials. They were cultivating the wild ancestor of maize, learning to store potatoes, and domesticating the llama. For thousands of years, these two civilizations grew, completely unaware that another human world was blossoming just beyond the jagged horizon. They were solving the same fundamental problems: how to build cities, how to organize society, how to explain the universe, but they were arriving at entirely different answers. Their languages bore no resemblance, their gods had different names and domains, their kings wielded power in unique ways. This was the mountain's second great effect. It acted as a perfect cultural insulator, preventing the exchange of ideas, technologies, and even diseases. Without this barrier, the world might have seen a gradual blending of these early societies. Instead, the Great Divide forced them to invent everything twice, creating two separate, parallel experiments in what it means to be human. The foundational differences that would one day lead to epic clashes and wondrous discoveries were being cemented in this long, silent period of isolation. And within these isolated worlds, the seeds of future empires were quietly being sown. The mountain wall was far more than a physical barrier. It was a master architect of climate. Each peak acted like a colossal gatekeeper for the weather itself, deciding which winds would bring life-giving rain and which would bring only dust. As moisture-laden air masses moved inland, they were forced to climb the mountain's windward slopes. The air cooled as it rose, squeezing out its water vapor in the form of persistent rain and snow, nourishing dense forests and fertile valleys below. But once that same air passed over the crest, it began to descend, warming and drying out on its way down the other side. The result was a rain shadow, a vast and often arid expanse where the skies were clear and water became the most precious of resources. This single, repeating process created a world of starkly different challenges. On one side of the divide, a civilization might awaken to the gentle, constant rhythm of rainfall, its rivers running full and its soil rich. On the other side, a society would learn to live by the harsh logic of the sun, where every drop of water was a treasure to be fought for and conserved. The very ground beneath their feet dictated their most fundamental struggles. In the rain-drenched lands, the primary challenge was managing abundance, controlling floods, and clearing forests to plant vast fields of grain. This agricultural surplus could support dense populations, which in turn required complex social organization, hierarchies, and powerful states to manage the collective effort. The path to civilization here was paved with wet soil and plentiful harvests. Meanwhile, in the rain's shadow, the challenge was one of survival in a landscape of scarcity. Here, civilizations could not rely on predictable rainfall. They became masters of ingenuity, building intricate systems of canals and underground aqueducts to capture and channel every possible drop of water from distant mountains. Large-scale farming was often impossible, so societies turned to pastoral traditions, herding hardy animals like goats, sheep, or camels that could thrive on sparse vegetation. Their social structures were often more flexible, built around kinship and mobility rather than permanent cities. The Great Divide ensured that the most basic human questions, how to find water, how to grow food, how to live together, were answered with completely different sets of tools and traditions. It was as if the same experiment in building a society was being run in two separate laboratories with entirely different rules. And in these separate labs, the seeds of future conflict and wonder were quietly taking root, born from the simple, unyielding fact of a dry wind on one side of a mountain and a wet one on the other. Nowhere is this grand separation of human worlds more vividly illustrated than in the shadow of the Himalayas. This colossal wall of rock and ice did far more than scrape the sky. It meticulously engineered two distinct realities for humanity. To the south, the mighty mountain range acted as a protective shield, catching the life-giving deluge of the annual monsoon. These rains fed immense river systems like the Indus and the Ganges, creating a sprawling, fertile cradle for one of the world's earliest and most sophisticated civilizations. In this land of abundance, the people of the Indus Valley built planned cities with advanced drainage and water supply systems, their lives dictated by the predictable rhythms of agriculture and trade. Their world was one of warm river valleys and dense populations, a bustling hub of early human innovation. Yet just on the other side of that impassable wall, an entirely different human experiment was unfolding. On the vast, windswept Tibetan plateau, life was defined by an entirely different set of rules. Here, the air was thin, the climate harsh and continental, with temperatures swinging violently between seasons. The societies that took root here did not build bustling river port cities. Instead, they became masters of a high-altitude world, domesticating the resilient yak and developing a nomadic pastoral culture perfectly suited to the rugged terrain. The technologies, the spiritual beliefs, the very structure of daily life became worlds apart. In the south, complex pantheons of gods and intricate social hierarchies emerged from the fertile soil. On the plateau, a different form of spirituality took hold, one deeply intertwined with the immense, stark landscape and the challenge of mere survival. The Himalayas were not merely a border on a map, they were the ultimate cultural insulator, proving that a single geological feature could act as the midwife to multiple parallel human worlds, each a brilliant and unique answer to the fundamental question of how to live. This separation did more than just create different cultures. It engineered entirely different technological realities. Cut off from one another, each civilization became a sealed workshop, forced to invent its own solutions using only the materials and challenges immediately at hand. The Great Divide meant that innovation, one of humanity's most powerful traits, was no longer a shared project. It became a parallel race run on two completely different tracks. On one side of the mountains, a society might be blessed with rich, easily accessible deposits of copper and tin. For them, the logical path of progress led straight into the fire of the forge. Over centuries, they would perfect the art of smelting, alloying, and casting, giving them superior tools, formidable weapons, and eventually, the ability to create intricate machinery. Their entire world, you might become shaped by metal, its strength and malleability reflected in their art and their very conception of power. Meanwhile, just a few hundred miles away on the other side of that impassable stone wall, a different civilization was looking at a completely different set of resources. Perhaps they had little metal, but they had an abundance of a particular plant, a fibrous reed that could be spun into incredibly strong thread. In this sealed workshop, innovation took a different turn. They became unparalleled masters of the loom, weaving intricate textiles that provided clothing, shelter, and even armor. Their greatest minds were not blacksmiths, but weavers and dyers, developing complex chemical knowledge to create vibrant, lasting colors. The very symbol of status and ingenuity in their society was not a gleaming bronze sword, but a magnificent, intricately patterned tapestry. This divergence extended to the most fundamental human inventions. The wheel, that cornerstone of mechanics, was not a single discovery that spread around the world. It was invented and reinvented independently in these isolated pockets. The same is true for writing. The symbols scratched onto clay tablets in one civilization bore no resemblance to the knotted chords or pictorial scripts developed in another. Even mathematical concepts like the idea of zero or methods of calculation emerged from separate lines of thought, solving local problems of trade, astronomy, and construction. When these long-lost siblings of humanity finally stumbled upon one another, the encounter was often one of profound mutual astonishment. The metal-rich civilization would gaze upon the intricate textiles of the other and see them as impossibly fine, almost magical creations. The master weavers, in turn, would handle a forged steel blade, a material harder and sharper than anything they had ever known, and perceive it as a gift from the gods. These were not just different goods, they were the end products of thousands of years of separate intellectual journeys, physical proof of a world split in two by a wall of ancient stone. Yet even the most formidable walls developed tiny cracks over time. The great divides were not impermeable, and through the highest, most treacherous mountain passes, a thin, fragile thread of connection began to form. This was the world of the Silk Road, a network of trade routes stitching the separate worlds of East and West together. But to call it a road is to misunderstand its nature. It was not a paved highway, but a series of narrow, perilous trails snaking through high-altitude deserts and across dizzying mountain saddles. The journey was an ordeal that could take years, a gamble with life itself where a single wrong turn, a bandit attack, or an unexpected blizzard could mean the end. This immense danger and difficulty meant that the Great Divide did not disappear, it simply became a filter. Only the most extraordinary things were valuable enough or portable enough to be worth carrying across. Think of a merchant caravan, a tiny line of camels and men moving through an ocean of sand and rock. Every ounce of weight mattered. They could not carry bulky grain or everyday pottery. Their cargo was reserved for the truly precious, silk so light and compact it was worth its weight in gold, and spices so potent a small pouch could flavor a king's feast for a year. Along with these material treasures traveled something even more powerful: ideas. Major religious beliefs like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam began their long marches across continents, carried by pilgrims and monks who walked the same arduous paths as the merchants. These were not the slow, blending exchanges of neighboring cultures. This was a trickle of concentrated influence, a few drops of dye coloring a vast ocean. A Chinese emperor might wear Roman glass, and a Roman noblewoman might drape herself in Chinese silk, but their fundamental understanding of the world, their languages, their political systems, remained utterly alien to one another. The core identities of the civilizations on either side of the mountains were so deeply rooted that these exotic imports did not change them, they merely decorated the edges. The Great Divide, therefore, was preserved. The mountains had allowed a whisper to pass through, but the separate conversations of humanity continued, loud and distinct, on either side of the stone wall. These immense geological formations became deeply embedded in the human imagination, transforming from mere rock into sacred symbols. Across countless cultures, the highest peaks were not simply part of the landscape. They were the thrones of the gods, the pillars that held up the heavens, or the impenetrable gates to the underworld. This was not just geography, it was cosmology. The mountain range became a spiritual border, a line dividing the known, ordered world of the living from the chaotic, divine, or dangerous realm of the other. This psychological barrier was often as powerful as the physical one. People living in the shadow of the Great Divide would tell stories, not about the fertile valleys or fellow humans on the other side, but about the terrifying giants, immortal spirits, or lost kingdoms that dwelled beyond the mist-shrouded peaks. These were not invitations to explore, they were powerful cultural warnings, myths designed to keep people within the safety of the known. The mountain, therefore, existed in two places at once, as a physical wall of stone and ice, and as an even more formidable wall in the mind. It taught generation after generation that the other side was not just far away, it was fundamentally different, sacred, and perilous. This deep-seated belief system actively reinforced the physical separation, making the idea of crossing over to meet the other not just a journey, but a transgression. And it raises a profound question about our own modern world. What invisible mountains have we built in our own minds, and what wonders or fellow humans do we imagine lie in the forbidden lands on the other side? The very words we speak carry the deep echo of ancient mountains. Language is perhaps the most sensitive and profound marker of long-term isolation, a living fossil of the Great Divide. When human groups were permanently separated by those colossal walls of rock, their shared tongue began a slow, unstoppable drift. The same words spoken by cousins who would never meet again started to change in subtle ways. Pronunciations shifted over generations, new words were invented for new landscapes and animals, and the very grammar of their speech began to follow different rules. After centuries, what was once a single, unified language blossomed into two completely different, mutually unintelligible tongues. A person from one side of the mountains could no longer understand a single word from the other, their shared heritage buried under millennia of separate experience. This process did not just happen on the grand scale of the range itself, but within the maze of its own rugged terrain. Deep in the high valleys and isolated basins of a single mountain chain, human communities could be cut off from their neighbors by nothing more than a steep ridge or a raging river. In these pockets of extreme isolation, language evolved at an astonishing rate, creating a stunning mosaic of diversity. The Caucasus Mountains, for instance, are a linguistic universe in miniature, home to dozens of distinct language families crowded into a relatively small area. Each valley could hold its own unique tongue, a world of words completely separate from the community just one mountain over. This incredible fragmentation is more than just a curiosity, it is a living record. It shows us with perfect clarity how effectively a mountain range can compartmentalize human communication, locking cultural identities into separate rooms for thousands of years. The story of our separation is not just written in our tools or our cities, but in the very sounds we use to define our world. The moment that shattered these ancient separations began not with a conquest but with a harvest. When European ships reached the Americas, they initiated a biological and cultural earthquake, an event we now call the Columbian Exchange. For the first time in tens of millions of years, the twin hemispheres, which had evolved in complete isolation, were violently stitched back together. The great continental divides, which had for so long acted as nature's perfect laboratories, were suddenly bridged by wooden ships. This was not a gentle meeting, but a sudden, chaotic collision of two separate evolutionary timelines. The results were as transformative as they were catastrophic. Imagine a world where the tomato, a plant native to the Andes, was utterly unknown in Italy. A world where the potato, cultivated for millennia in the highlands of South America, had never fed a single Irish family. A world where horses, which had originated in the Americas only to go extinct there, were reintroduced as if from a forgotten myth. This was the reality before 1492. The exchange that followed was a two-way street, but it was a street paved with wildly unequal consequences. From the old world to the new traveled wheat, sugar, horses and cattle, animals and crops that would radically alter the American landscape. But traveling with them were invisible stowaways, diseases like smallpox and measles, to which the isolated populations of the Americas had no immunity. The devastation was unimaginable, wiping out vast swaths of the population and collapsing entire empires. In return, the Americas gave the world corn, potatoes, and cassava, crops so calorie-rich and hardy that they would eventually fuel a population explosion across Europe, Africa, and Asia. This was the ultimate demonstration of the power of the Great Divide. For thousands of years, the mountains and oceans had allowed these two worlds to develop their own unique biological and cultural suites. When that divide was finally breached, the reunion was not a peaceful one. It was a tumultuous, often tragic mixing that proved just how profound and dangerous long-term separation could be. The globalized world we know today was born in this traumatic, forced reconnection, a permanent end to the age of isolation. Even today, the Great Divide carves its presence onto our political maps. The lines we draw between nations often follow the ancient, unyielding crests of mountain ranges. Look at the jagged border between Chile and Argentina, a line traced directly along the spine of the Andes. Or consider the colossal Himalayas, a natural fortress that defines the frontiers of India, China, and Nepal. These are not random lines chosen by cartographers in distant rooms. They are modern political acknowledgments of a deep geographical truth. A mountain range does not just separate ecosystems and species, it forges distinct human identities. Over centuries, the peoples living on either side of this wall developed their own languages, their own cultural traditions, and their own sense of nationhood. When the time came to define the modern state, the most logical, most defensible border was often the one that nature had already built. Yet this very logic can become a source of tension. A border born from ancient separation can harden into a point of modern conflict. The same peaks that fostered different worldviews can become the stage for territorial disputes. The different national identities that blossomed in isolation can sometimes look upon each other with suspicion or ambition across the high mountain passes. The Great Divide, in its silent, immovable way, continues to shape not just the land, but the very nature of human politics and power. Its legacy is a world where our most contentious frontiers are often the oldest ones, a permanent reminder of the walls that shaped us. These mountains are not just dividers, they are arcs. They carry within their isolated folds a secret world of life, a biological treasure chest forged by millions of years of solitude. From the grandest scale of the range down to a single, secluded valley, these landscapes have become global hotspots of biodiversity and endemism. Endemism is a scientific term with a simple, profound meaning, a species that is found nowhere else on Earth. And mountain ranges are their greatest creators. Think of a single high valley cut off from the world by impassable cliffs. The climate in this pocket is unique, a touch colder, a bit wetter, with a specific soil composition found only on that particular slope. This valley becomes an evolutionary island. The plants and animals trapped here are forced to adapt to their very specific world or perish. Over immense stretches of time, they change, slowly becoming so specialized that they can no longer survive anywhere else. They become living relics unique to that one mountain, that one valley. The Cape Floristic region in South Africa is a breathtaking testament to this power. Hemmed in by mountains and sea, this small area became a sealed laboratory for plant evolution. The result is a botanical wonderland, home to over 9,000 plant species, and a staggering 70% of them are endemic. They grow nowhere else on the planet. Walking through this region is like wandering through a natural museum where every flower, every shrub, is a one-of-a-kind masterpiece, a story of adaptation written in petals and leaves. This incredible richness is the mountain's most beautiful and fragile legacy. It is a living library of genetic history, a record of countless evolutionary experiments that were only possible because a wall of stone kept the world out. Every unique frog in an Andean cloud forest, every bizarre succulent on a sheer cliff face, is a direct product of the Great Divide, a silent, vibrant monument to the power of isolation. The ancient walls that defined our world for millions of years are now facing a force they cannot contain. Climate change is actively dismantling the very foundations of the Great Divide. The permanent ice that sealed high mountain passes for millennia is now retreating, revealing rocky corridors that have not been opened since the last ice age. These new pathways are not just geological curiosities, they are potential highways for a chaotic and unprecedented migration. Animals and plants, once confined to their separate sides by impassable ice, can now begin to wander across, forcing a sudden and unpredictable collision of ecosystems that have not met in recorded history. The stable, isolated worlds that the mountains so carefully engineered are beginning to blur. For the species uniquely adapted to the cold heights, this warming is a death sentence. Creatures like the snow leopard or the American pika are being pushed ever higher up the slopes, searching for the cool, thin air they need to survive. But a mountain is not a bottomless ladder. Eventually, they will reach the summit with no more room to climb, trapped on an island of rock in a rising sea of heat. The specialized life that evolved in the mountain's unique climate zones now finds its home shrinking beneath its feet. This is not a slow geological process anymore, it is a rapid and violent remixing. The delicate balance of entire food webs is being thrown into disarray as new predators, new competitors, and new diseases flow through the newly opened gates in the mountains. The Great Divide, which for so long guaranteed the diversity of life by keeping it apart, is now failing, threatening that very same biodiversity with a sudden and turbulent reunion. The proof of this long separation is not found in ancient texts but buried in the earth itself. When archaeologists carefully excavate settlements on opposite sides of a major range, they uncover two distinct worlds frozen in time. On one side of the mountains, a village's trash pits might be filled with fragments of a distinct coiled pottery, decorated with geometric patterns in red ochre. The dead are buried in a fetal position facing the rising sun, accompanied by simple stone tools. Just 100 miles away on the other side, across an impassable ridge, a contemporary site tells a completely different story. Here, the pottery is smooth, wheel-thrown, and painted with intricate spirals. The burial customs are starkly different, with bodies laid out straight and interred with ornate jewelry made from local seashells. For centuries, these two communities lived, died, and created, utterly unaware of the other's existence. The most telling clue is often what is missing. In the layers of soil that represent 1,000 years of habitation, there is not a single shard of the geometric pottery among the spiral designs, and no trace of seashell jewelry in the red ochre villages. This clean archaeological break, this invisible line that runs directly along the mountain crest, is the silent testimony to the divide's power. It wasn't that these people were hostile toward one another. They simply inhabited separate universes, their cultural innovations blossoming in complete isolation, creating a perfect natural experiment in what it means to be human. The mountains that split our world are themselves fleeting. The forces that raised them are still at work, a slow but relentless geological engine that never truly stops. To understand the true scale of the Great Divide, you must look beyond human history, beyond even the age of the dinosaurs, and into the deep, churning rhythm of the planet itself. The continents we stand on are not fixed in place. They are colossal rafts of rock, adrift on a sea of molten mantle, forever colliding, pulling apart, and scraping past one another. The Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps, these are all just temporary wrinkles in the Earth's crust, formed in one geological moment and destined to be worn down to stumps in another. The process of division is not a single event that happened long ago. It is a continuous, dynamic force, the planet's primary method for creating new worlds and then, just as methodically, destroying them. Look at the Great Rift Valley in Africa, a colossal tear in the continent's skin. This is not a mountain range being built, but a continent being pulled apart. It is a divergent boundary where the African plate is slowly, inexorably splitting into two. Today, it is a valley, but given tens of millions of years, that rupture will deepen and widen. The Indian Ocean will flood in, carving a new sea between what is now East Africa and the rest of the continent. In that distant future, a new, even more absolute divide will be born. The animals on either side of that new ocean will be severed forever, their evolutionary path set on separate courses. The humans, or whatever intelligent life follows us, will gaze across a watery expanse at a land they can no longer reach, their cultures and technologies destined to drift apart in a new and profound isolation. The great divides of our past were monumental, but they were only the current chapter in a story that is still being written, a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is the most powerful and restless character in the long history of life. This profound separation did more than just create different languages and tools. It fundamentally shaped how people saw one another. The mountain wall made strangers of neighbors, turning the unknown people on the other side into figures of myth and fear. Without any real contact, the human mind filled the void with stories. The fertile valley on your side of the peaks was the civilized world, the only world. But the lands beyond the jagged horizon were the home of monsters, giants, or godlike beings of immense power. The mountain itself became a mental landmark, a permanent boundary between the familiar us and the utterly alien them. This was not a simple geographical fact, but a deep psychological rift that grew wider with every generation. A child raised in the shadow of the Great Divide would learn from cradle songs and elder tales that to cross the peaks was to venture into a realm of chaos and danger. This cultural inheritance created a powerful, instinctive xenophobia, a deep-seated suspicion of anyone or anything that came from over the mountains. The physical journey across the high passes was a brutal test of endurance, but the journey across this mental barrier could be even more challenging. Long after roads were built and passes were mapped, this ingrained perception of the other side as a land of mystery or menace persisted. It colored the first diplomatic encounters, making every gesture seem potentially hostile and every strange custom seem barbaric. It influenced trade, making merchants from across the range seem inherently untrustworthy, and it fueled conflicts, transforming border disputes into epic clashes of civilizations, as if the people on the other side were not merely rivals, but a different order of being. The mountain had successfully built a wall inside the human mind, one that would stand for centuries after the stone itself could be climbed. The same stone wall that split cultures also carved a deep and lasting chasm of wealth. On one side of the divide, the land might have been blessed with fertile river valleys and easily accessible deposits of gold or copper. This was the winning ticket in the lottery of geography. Here, a society could generate vast agricultural surpluses, feeding dense populations of artisans, merchants, and soldiers. Their wealth allowed them to build ports and fund fleets, connecting them to global trade networks that brought in even more riches and ideas. This was a virtuous cycle of prosperity, all made possible by the advantageous side of the mountain. But just over the crest, on the other side of that unyielding geological line, the story was often the opposite. The rain's shadow created arid plains where farming was a constant struggle. The terrain might have been a maze of rugged hills, making the transport of any goods a logistical nightmare and cutting off access to the sea. While one civilization flourished, its neighbor, through no fault of its own, was left with a landscape of scarcity. The people here became experts in survival, but their economy remained local, small-scale, and isolated. They simply did not have the same raw materials to build empires or engage in long-distance trade. The mountain did not just create two different cultures, it engineered two profoundly different economic destinies. And the most striking part of this story is how these ancient patterns of fortune and misfortune refuse to fade. You can still see their shadow on a modern economic map. The regions that were historically blessed by geography often remain the industrial powerhouses and financial centers of today. Meanwhile, the areas on the wrong side of the divide frequently struggle with poverty and underdevelopment, their isolation a ghost that still haunts their infrastructure and opportunities. The Great Range, therefore, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a key that helps explain the uneven distribution of wealth in our modern world, a silent architect of the global economic landscape. So the mountain created a wall, but the rivers flowing from it carved the rooms on either side. These powerful waterways became the lifeblood of civilization, the original superhighways that bound people together. Think of a great river like the Ganges, born from the meltwater of the high Himalayas. It does not cut through the mountains to the other side. Instead, it gathers strength and flows in one direction, south and east, across the vast northern plains of India. For the people living in its basin, the river was not a barrier but a connector. A farmer could load his grain onto a simple raft and, with the current's help, travel to a distant market town. A poet's verse could travel upstream and downstream, carried by merchants and pilgrims, slowly weaving a shared cultural tapestry across thousands of miles. The river gave everyone in its domain a common source of water, a common route for travel, and a common stories. This is how a unified cultural sphere was born. On one side of the Himalayas, the Ganges and the Indus River systems created an integrated world, a recognizably South Asian cultural bloc, united by shared religious practices, social structures, and artistic traditions. But what was happening on the other side of that immense mountain wall? The exact same process was unfolding, just with a different river. The Tibetan Plateau, the other side of the Himalayan divide, is the source of some of Asia's greatest rivers, like the Yangtze and the Yellow River. These waters flow east, away from the Indian subcontinent, carving their own channels of unity through what would become China. They fostered their own distinct cultural sphere, with its unique philosophies, writing systems, and political ideals. The mountain range, therefore, was not just a point of separation. It was a massive, singular water tower feeding two separate and closed plumbing systems. Each system watered its own garden, allowing the plants within it to grow together, intertwine, and create a cohesive whole, while the garden on the other side of the wall developed its own, entirely different ecosystem of ideas and traditions. The Great Divide did not just create random fragments. It engineered two distinct, internally unified worlds, each humming with its own shared identity, all because the rivers flowed in one direction and not the other. A civilization's soul is etched in stone and painted on pottery, and the Great Divide ensured these souls developed in complete solitude, with no outside influence to copy or contradict. Artistic traditions became deeply personal and powerfully unique. Every brushstroke, every carved symbol was a pure expression of a people's own worldview, a direct answer to the landscape and gods they knew. The materials at hand became their vocabulary. A society blessed with vast forests built soaring temples of wood, their architecture a testament to the towering trees around them. Another, living in a stark landscape of rock, learned to shape the very mountains into their cities, their artistry born from an intimate conversation with stone. This was not a matter of choice but of necessity and isolation converging to create a signature style. look at the breathtaking stonework of the Inca. Their structures were not simply built on the mountains, they were woven into them. Each polygonal block was painstakingly shaped to fit perfectly with its neighbors, a technique that allowed their walls to withstand the relentless earthquakes that shook their highland home. Their art was one of seamless integration, of making the man-made indistinguishable from the divine natural world. Now, cross the great continental divide and consider the grand temples of the Indian plains. Here, architecture reached for the heavens. Soaring, intricately carved spires or shikaras were covered in a riot of sculpted figures depicting gods, goddesses, and mythical creatures. This was an art of abundance and narrative, telling the epic stories of the universe in stone, reflecting a cosmology as rich and layered as the fertile land itself. One style speaks of harmony with an immovable environment, the other of a celebration of a vibrant spiritual universe. These were not just different buildings, they were different dreams made solid, two separate answers to the same human urge to create meaning, proving that the most profound artistic statements are often those made in a room of one's own, with the door to the rest of the world firmly closed. Our modern world is woven together by a web of instant connection, a reality that makes the ancient power of the Great Divide feel almost unimaginable. Yet this story of long separation holds a vital and perhaps unsettling lesson for our globalized age. We have spent centuries celebrating connection, tearing down walls both physical and digital to create a single, intertwined human community. But in doing so, we may have overlooked the profound value of what those walls once protected: isolation. For it is in isolation that true, radical diversity is born. The incredible variety of hummingbirds in the Andes, the unique languages of the Caucasus, the distinct artistic souls of civilizations that never met, all of these were direct products of being left alone to develop along their own unique path. The mountain range was a guardian of difference, a force that ensured the human and natural world did not become a single, monotonous story. Now, as our global culture flattens local traditions into a universal sameness, and as invasive species hitch rides on container ships to disrupt ancient ecosystems, we are witnessing a great homogenization. The unique cultural practices, the local dialects, the endemic species that were once protected by immense barriers of rock and distance, are now profoundly vulnerable. The very things that made different parts of our planet wondrous and strange are fading. This does not mean we should rebuild physical walls, but it does force us to ask a difficult question. In our rush to connect everything, are we accidentally erasing the unique results of millions of years of separate experimentation? The legacy of the Great Divide teaches us that diversity is not a default state. It is a fragile achievement, a treasure forged in the quiet, separate laboratories of time and space. Preserving the unique cultures and ecosystems that remain is not about resisting progress, but about honoring the incredible, irreplaceable variety that our planet spent eons creating. It is about remembering that some of the most beautiful things in the world grew precisely because a mountain stood in the way. Human engineering is now actively dismantling the ancient walls that nature built. We no longer just navigate around the mountains or gaze at them in wonder. We bore straight through their hearts. Massive tunnel boring machines chew through miles of solid rock, creating direct highways and rail lines where only impassable stone once stood. In the sky above, a web of satellites connects both sides of the range with instant communication, making the physical distance and the perilous journey irrelevant with a simple click. The Great Divide, for so long the ultimate arbiter of separation, is being systematically bridged, bypassed, and ignored. This is a monumental shift in the human story, a direct assault on the very geography that shaped us. But this newfound connectivity forces us to confront a difficult paradox. Does bridging the physical gap automatically bridge the human one? When two cultures that developed in isolation for thousands of years are suddenly thrust together by a new highway, the encounter is not always one of harmony. The ancient psychological walls, the ingrained suspicions, and the deep-seated cultural differences forged over millennia do not vanish just because a tunnel has been drilled. They can instead be amplified, leading to new tensions over resources, land, and identity. The internet can spread understanding, but it can also spread misinformation and prejudice at the speed of light, creating digital chasms as deep as any physical canyon. We are entering a strange new chapter where the old, clear lines of division are fading, only to be replaced by a complex, often invisible, landscape of new challenges. The mountain range is no longer the primary barrier. The new divides exist in the algorithms we write and the stories we choose to believe. The story of the Great Divide is far from a closed book. Even with all we have uncovered, the mountains guard lingering enigmas that push science forward. Geneticists are now using the tools of modern DNA analysis to read the fine print of human history, tracing the subtle detours and pauses our ancestors took as they navigated around these colossal barriers. The genetic code of modern populations holds echoes of ancient pathways, revealing not just where people went, but where they were forced to stop, to settle, and to separate for far longer than anyone suspected. It is a story written in our very cells, at the very same time in the most isolated cloud forests and inaccessible valleys. Ecologists are making breathtaking discoveries. They are finding species entirely new to science, living relics that have evolved in their secluded pockets for millennia. Each new frog with its unique call, each unknown plant with its peculiar bloom, is a fresh piece of a puzzle we are only just beginning to assemble. These are not just new names for a catalogue, they are vital clues to understanding how life innovates when left completely alone. And beneath the soil, archaeologists are uncovering a plot twist. They are finding artifacts that suggest rare, astonishing moments of contact, a seashell from a distant ocean high in a mountain pass, or a style of pottery that seems to belong to a culture hundreds of miles away. These finds whisper of intrepid individuals who did cross the impossible divides, challenging our neat narratives of total isolation and proving that human curiosity has always been a wild card. Perhaps the most urgent mystery lies in the future. Climate scientists are racing to model the full impact of a warming world on these delicate, separated ecosystems. How quickly will species be forced to migrate through newly opened corridors? Which unique, endemic life forms will find themselves with nowhere left to run? The Great Divide, this ancient sculptor of life and culture, remains one of our planet's most fertile grounds for discovery. Every unanswered question is a reminder that the final chapter has not been written, and that new secrets are still waiting, silent and patient, in the shadow of the